right. Welcome everybody. For people that are going to be slowly starting to come in, it's not a problem. We'll just wait maybe another minute, but just so everyone knows that this is being recorded to LinkedIn as well as to our YouTube channel as well. So if you don't catch the beginning or you want to rewatch anything, um, it will be available. So make sure to follow us on LinkedIn as well. If anybody is in right now, could you just let me know if the camera and everything is okay? You guys can hear me fine? Perfect. Let me just take one look very quickly as well. All right, great. So today we're going to be talking about navigating the self-employment permit in Sweden. This is something that's becoming more and more of a topic for people uh, in line with a lot of the layoffs that are happening. So we're getting a lot of consultations and questions from people that are here on work permits and are interested in then considering self-employment. So we thought it would be a good idea to talk about the self-employment process because it's not as easy as just wanting to apply for a self-employed permit. And to talk maybe a little bit about the ways that you can prepare yourself for the future as well if self-employment is something that is potentially interesting to you. Um, Before we get started, hi everyone. My name is Zaya Sorrells Weatherford. I am the CEO and co-founder of Emigrate, where we support skilled professionals and international students navigate their immigration and relocation processes in Sweden and hopefully soon throughout the EU. I do 30-minute consultations as well as we do hourly support for people. And in that time, I have done support on self-employment permits as well and have overseen some successful applications and largely kind of had discussions with different people that are going through this and can kind of go through what the standard pitfalls are, what the general feedback seems to be from the agency regarding people's applications, as well as best practices that you can start to prepare early. So, as an overview of the self-employment permit, there are a few things that are generally absolutely required. And if you don't have these things, then there's kind of not a chance to be granted a self-employment permit. So, first of all, obviously, you need to have a valid passport, preferably for longer than 2 years, or else you'll be issued one for less than 2 years. You have to have good experience in the industry and in running your own business, relevant knowledge of Swedish and English, and I'll get into some of these as pitfalls later. You actually have to be the one running your own business and own at least 51% of it. And you also need to show that you have executive decision-making power over it, as well as the proof of how you're planning to do that. And you need to have finances. So you need to have at least 200,000 Swedish crowns for yourself, as well as 100,000 Swedish crown for a spouse and 50,000 Swedish crown per child that's attached to the application. And that's kind of as your base savings. That's not including the money that you'll likely need in order to run the business and things like that. But that's just specifically designed of if you're not starting to make an income right away, do you have the finances that you don't have to rely on the state in order to support yourself while you're getting the business off the ground? You will be asked questions, or you'll be issued you'll need to issue a business plan as well that goes through your services or what your product is, who your customers are, who your competitors are, what's your marketing and your sales and business strategy, and all of those things, as well as it's good to then have financial projections and actually calculate what the cost of doing business is going to be for you, as well as your projected revenue. And you need to show that you've created customer contacts or a network. Now, I know that this can be quite difficult, especially if you're applying for the self-employment permit either from abroad, so you don't actually have a network inside Sweden yet, or the people that are in Sweden that have been on work permits or they're on student permits and they're looking to start the business, but they haven't actually started it yet, and yet they need to actually submit this application in a certain amount of time. Now, when it comes to the sort of documentation that you'll be required to submit, you need to submit things like bank certificates that show you have the sufficient funds to support you and your family for 2 years. The funds, if they are not in Sweden, you need to show that they are easily accessible. They need to be translated into English or Swedish, and it's good to show what the Swedish crown equivalents would be if it's in a different currency. Additionally, it should be your name that's on the bank account, or certainly a way to show that you have easy financial access to it as well. It doesn't really work to have things in stocks or to say that you're going to be borrowing money from your family. It's best if you do that, you really need to try to just have as much liquidity as possible in your bank account. Bank certificates that show you have enough money to buy the company or start the company, as well as to cover the costs and investments that you may have. If you've actually purchased an existing company, then you'll obviously need to show the purchase contract or agreement. You need to register a company, and this can either be, it's not required to be an aktiebolag or a version of the LLC. You can also do an enskildsfirma or a sole trader as well. A copy of a course certificate or the proof that you know Swedish or English at a relevant level. Your qualification certification, so your degrees if you've graduated. If you have previous employers in Sweden, then employer certificates and a registration certificate for companies that you have had or have outside of Sweden. There is other potential documentation that you may need to submit, so copies of contracts with customers, if you have them. If you took over an existing company, then the two most recent annual reports or financial statements, and a balance sheet and profit and loss statement, so balansrapport and resultatrapport for the current financial year up to the previous month. But that's if the company has been operational as well. When it comes to the self-employment permit, it doesn't have the highest acceptance rate. So I believe in 2024, there were 109 self-employment permits that were issued. I don't know whether it's because the requirements are high, which they are, or because there was a big surge in people submitting incomplete applications in order to buy themselves more time after a layoff before they could then submit a new work permit application. But I'm assuming then, I don't know the exact percentage, but I'm assuming the rejection percentage or the percentage of success is not very high. But I think it's probably a combination of the two. It is also becoming increasingly more difficult to get the self-employment permit, and there are a lot of requirements regarding understanding how to run a business is a very important one, and also trying to tie in whatever previous experience you have into it. So when it comes to common mistakes or feedback that I've seen in decision letters regarding rejections for self-employment permit applications, the kind of most common things that are having people be rejected are having little to no experience running a business, having little to no experience or education in the intended field of the business, no customer list, no Swedish proficiency, which I know is interesting because they obviously ask for Swedish and English. But there are more and more people that are getting rejected because they don't have any Swedish proficiency, and not being able to either have majority ownership of the company or prove executive decision making for the company as well. In terms of these, I'll talk a little bit about the risk mitigation, but I've seen a few cases or I've talked to a few people. For example, there was somebody that had was in school, and while they were in school, they were hired by a company. So they joined the company. The company then went through layoffs, and they were let go. And so they were trying to apply for a self-employed permit, but it was this person's spouse. It was in their field that the business would be. And there were a few problems with that. Then the main applicant didn't have an education in the same kind of field that the business was going, or the same industry that the business was going to be in. And there was no way to show that they had any experience running a business because they hadn't before. And it was quite clear then that they wouldn't be the executive decision maker, even if they owned 51% of the company and their spouse owned 49% of the company, simply based on their two backgrounds. It was fairly clear that the spouse or the dependent in this case would actually kind of be the person that was largely responsible for the company, and that would end up leading to a rejection of a work permit application. In the same way, people tend to be caught up right now on not having a customer list, and Swedish is starting to catch people as well. So when it comes to then risk mitigation, there are a few things that you can do in order to try to limit the risks in the application, or at least try to improve your chances as well. So one thing would be, if you're going to start your own company, choose a business idea that you have experience in. This is not the time to be creative. I understand that Swedes who go through layoffs, or EU citizens that go through layoffs, they can then, let's say they were an engineer, they got laid off, they decide to start a restaurant because that's their passion, that's what they want to do. That's okay for them. But in your case, if your right to residence depends on this business plan, that will be seen as too big of a risk, and certainly too high of startup costs, that the Swedish Migration Agency will have a difficult time believing that the business will be successful. To go from something that you're experienced in to something with no experience and high startup costs, it will be difficult to bridge that gap. So if you have experience as an engineer, you are better off starting an engineering consultancy than you would be to start a creative new idea. So in these sort of situations, the best thing to do is to stick with what you know. If you're completing your education in Sweden, it is best to actually finish your degree before starting a business. Now, technically, if you've studied in Sweden, you may apply for a self-employed permit from inside the country as long as you apply before your student permit expires and you've completed at least 30 credits or 1 semester of postgraduate education in Sweden. However, without the degree, it is difficult to argue that you have the education to compensate for lack of experience to actually run a business in a specific field. So in general, I do understand that it is nice to start your own business, or the idea of making an income rather than paying tuition. There is the appeal, but for a better chance of success, it is better to actually finish your education first. Now, you can, for example, start the company, work on it a little bit while you finish your education so that you build a potentially a client list, or you have letters of intent, or you get some information out there. And you kind of get your name out there. And then once you've graduated, you can apply for the self-employed permit. And then you can show a good track history as well. If you have not actually gotten any customers yet, I do recommend to try to collect letters of intent from potential customers. So this can be like from your current employer, from friends and family, from people that could be potential customers in this area that you want to work in. It's good to collect letters of intent to show that at least the business, there is viability to your business. Now, letters of intent don't actually have to be binding. You can get non-binding letters of intent. So it's low pressure, but it just shows an interest in what you have to offer. So if you don't have a customer list, if you don't have any existing contracts, then getting letters of intent is better than not getting anything. As the requirements for Swedish language are starting to increase, there are kind of two options that you have. You can either show proof of Swedish language learning. So either you go to SFI, you take private classes, you take a test to show your level of Swedish. Or if you have a small company and you'll need to do sales in Sweden, then you can put into your business plan that you have a plan to hire a Swedish salesperson part-time, for example, or you'll have a Swedish accountant that will help with your accounting, or anything that shows that you do have plans in order to incorporate Swedish language into your company, whether you're the person that speaks it or not, because the Swedish language one is starting to actually catch people. And finally, if you have a company, let's say you're like, I'm a freelancer, all my clients are abroad, that works, but it is good to prove why the company needs to be based in Sweden, because if your company isn't based, if you don't have any Swedish clients, if there's nothing to do with Sweden, with the exception of you happening to be in Sweden, then the agency might find issue as to why do you need to be in Sweden full time if all of your clients are actually overseas. So if there is a way to incorporate Swedish customers into your business plan, I think that's quite important, because I think that's going to start to become a bigger and bigger thing, especially because Sweden does not have the digital nomad visa, is how can you set up your business in a way that will actually work with Swedish customers? Because you do need to kind of show why it's Sweden that you need to be in full time. I do have a few questions here. So, regarding all of this so far is applicable to any type of companies. So whether you're applying for the self-employment permit with an AB, an aktiebolag or LLC, or an enhetsfirma or a sole trader, sole proprietorship, these are all the same requirements. That doesn't matter. So even if you have an AB company, even if you get a business partner, you as the self-employment permit applicant has to have majority ownership of the company. So you need to have at least 51%. And it's not just having 51%. You need to show that you have executive decision making in the company as well. With regards to, I guess, the question, if it's management, I'm not 100% sure, but if you're talking about like your business plan, I mean, if you can incorporate some sort of management into your business plan, then that's great. I think one of the things that's important to know is that you can't really only have one large client. So if you plan on working as a consultant, you should really aim to have at least 2 to 3 clients, not just one large client, because the risk that they're going to see is that if you have one large client, what happens if that contract falls through? Where is your income going to be? So in general, I always recommend, if people are applying, to try to get at least 3 letters of intent, or show that you have a plan to have at least 3 ongoing clients at the same time, so that if one client falls through or if one contract ends, then you actually continue to have sustainable income. Because everything, when it comes down to this business plan and your business idea, is they expect you to actually start taking out like a salary and making good money within a year. So it's not like the typical, let's say, like startup grind where you're expected to kind of slog through it. Like, you need to actually pick ideas that you think can be kind of quickly built and sustainable as well. Also, if you do get approval on the self-employed permit, you are not allowed to take up employment elsewhere. So you can't work part-time for a company as an employee while you have a self-employed permit. That's not allowed. You can work for them part-time and invoice them from your company if it's within the same line of business as what you got the permit for. But you can't actually have employment part-time with another company while you're on a self-employed permit. That's pretty much means for immediate rejection when it comes to your extension time. So I think that's quite important when we're talking about best practices of the self-employment permit application. There are a few things. I always recommend, if the potential for self-employment, or if you feel that this is something that's on the horizon, I do recommend start preparing as early as possible. A lot of people won't even think of switching to self-employed until they face a layoff. And that's a very short amount of time, because you have typically then 3 months or less, if you get that, in order to not only come up with a comprehensive business plan and have everything in place, but you're also trying to frantically job search at the same time so that you can have a work permit. It's a very difficult 3 months. It's difficult to hand in a complete application. And if you submit an incomplete application, you can't count on them taking a long time to look at your application. If you submit a very incomplete application, and then in order to buy yourself more time, and then you file a new work permit application because you find a job, that can actually cause trouble, because they may look at your self-employment application first, say this was very clearly an unserious application and you did it in order to buy yourself more time. Therefore, this is actually going to cause problems for your following work permit application. So it's really important, whether you're doing this as a way to buy yourself time or not, it's really important that you treat this as if it is a real proper application, in order to prevent being suspected of just using it as a way to kind of track jump and buy yourself time to be in Sweden while you're waiting for a decision. So with that, I generally recommend to start thinking early. So if you come to Sweden on a work permit, start thinking about how you can transition to self-employment. Start thinking of a business idea, start networking, creating contacts, come up with a business plan, think about your service and how much you're going to charge, and your sales and your marketing strategy, and start actually thinking about those sort of things. And if possible, actually register like a sole trader, for example, fairly early on, because one thing that they are starting to look at now as well is how closely to your time of application are you registering a sole trader. If it's like the day before you submit a self-employment application, then they might again think, oh, you're doing it as a way to give yourself more time. So it's important that you treat it as a real business prospect. And hopefully you never have to actually apply for self-employed if that's not your intent. But if that day comes, then at least you have put in the legwork in order to limit your stress when the time actually comes. Additionally, let's say you apply for a self-employment permit as an engineering consultant. And while you're waiting on your application, you actually decide to change business ideas. So you register a new company instead, and you decide to become a professor, let's say. Now, you actually have to submit a new self-employment application, or you at least have to notify the agency and submit all new information to show the new company and the new business plan and your new business idea. Because if you don't, you're actually working on your business on something other than the premise for which your self-employment permit was submitted. So it's really important, if you change your business idea, it's very important to also contact the agency. And that's whether you're waiting for a decision, after a decision has been made. So after a decision has been made and you receive a permit, you are still limited in scope of what that business actually is. If you want to change that business, then you do need to notify the agency and submit a new application, because I've also seen rejections, especially at the extension stage, because the agency will look at the business information and say, this actually wasn't what we approved at all. So it's really important that you have as much communication with the agency. With regards to, can you apply for the self-employment permit if you're currently on a student permit? So you can, as long as you submit the application before the expiration of your student permit, and you have completed at least 30 credits or 1 semester of postgraduate, then you can submit it and then start working then on your new business, as long as the other requirements you have in place. The thing I think most people get tripped up on is obviously the finances and not being able to clearly show those finances, um, is the area I think that people, kind of become ineligible the most. But if you fulfill the requirements, then yes, you can apply for the self-employment permit from inside Sweden and wait for your decision from inside Sweden, as long as you apply before your student permit expires. If you if you have your self-employed permit approved, then you'll apply for an extension, typically 2 years later, but it may be shorter as well. And in that time, when it comes to your extension, you're going to have to show that you pay your business's taxes and fees, that you have all your permits up to date, whether you can support you and your family with the income from the business, whether this is a sustainable business, and whether you and your family have a reasonable living situation. If things go to Kronofogden or the Swedish Enforcement Authority, if you have defaulted on payments, all of those things can actually prevent you from getting your extension. So it's very important that you stay up to date on everything. I have a question here. Can I count an equity-based engagement as a client relationship if I'm working under an advisory contract? I'm not 100% sure. I think if that's your only engagement, then probably not, because you need to show that you're making the finances. And I also think that if it's an equity-based engagement, then there is the implication. It really depends. You'd have to talk to a tax advisor or an accountant, because it really depends on how you structure that in terms of whether it's your company that's going to be equity and what the worth of that is. What I don't know what the tax implications of that are going to be, but that's important to stay on top of, and just making sure that you're not actually an employee in any way. So that would have to be something. So it can't be you, it has to be your company then that would have those that engagement. But I think that they'll be looking mostly for what are your finances going to be like, because if all of your contracts are equity based, how are you going to be making money? So it could probably be one that you have as a one-off, but it certainly shouldn't be your business model, because especially in today's economy, there's no guarantee of that equity paying off as well. Does anybody have any questions? We have had some that I've tried to answer. We do actually as well. So we have created a free resource for people. So it's a starter kit. It's a PDF that has both the requirements and the documentation for the self-employed permit, the common pitfalls, risk mitigation strategy, good to know, and best practices as well. So I will put the link that you can then go to. We will collect your email address for that. And then you will get access to the free PDF. If you'd also like, we will have the self-employed permit as a process or a pathway at emigrate.io. We are going to, within the next week, be relaunching our platform to support skilled professionals and international students to manage their immigration and relocation processes in Sweden. So you can sign up for a free account, or you can sign up for a free account or upgrade to premium when the time comes. As an employee residence permit holder, if you apply for the self-employment permit, can you wait for the decision inside Sweden? Yes, you can, if you apply before your work permit expires. And importantly, you cannot stay on as an employee of the company that you have that you're employed by. But if you're on a valid work permit, you can apply for the self-employment permit from inside Sweden and work on your business while you are in Sweden. I think the main things to know is be prepared, think about all the strategy, and have a good plan regarding like what are your services, what's your pricing, what's your cost, what are your financial projections. You should, be aiming to have a 3-year financial projection in your business plan, because you also need to show that you have an understanding of what the costs of the business are going to be conservative with your business in terms of you should start a business based on what you know and what you have experience in. If you don't have experience running your own business, what you're going to have to rely on then is your extensive experience in the industry then. So you really need to focus on that and try to pick something that you know, that you have a network in, that you've already found that there's a need for, and focus on that rather than trying to like pursue your greatest life streams or be creative with your business. Um, if you choose to be creative and kind of go off on a brand new path, then you really need to bring a very robust business plan, and you need to show them that you've brought experts into this that can help you actually do this successfully as well. Um, Make sure that you can show the proper finances, so have the proper bank statements. Counting on kind of, oh, we'll be taking personal loans from family isn't going to be enough. You need to actually show that you have it in your account, and show that you have kind of ample finances for yourself, as well as focus on why the business should be in Sweden. And if you don't speak Swedish, who can you bring into the company in order to have Swedish inside the company? One thing as well that I think it's important, because I had this question before, if you have been laid off, a lot of people will go on a-kassa or unemployment while when they get laid off, kind of during that period of time. It's very important to note that if you apply for the self-employed permit, if you start working on your own business at all, you are actually ineligible for a-kassa or unemployment. And this is for everybody. This is for Swedes as well. Because then you're showing that you're not 100% available for the job market. So if you do any marketing, if you do any outreach, if you do anything like that, you cannot continue to take a-kassa. So after you've submitted your self-employment permit application, you really should not be taking it. If you do, that can either result in them finding out and you having to repay the money, or it could lead to problems then when Migrationsverket checks your finances or your taxes and things like that, and they'll have that question mark of why are you taking unemployment? So if you apply for the self-employed permit after you've been laid off, you cannot take unemployment at the same time. Now, it's best to speak to your union about it just to confirm. I'm not the leading expert on that, but based on what I've been looking at, that's really important to know. So please speak to your union before you do that as well. There are no priority topics or industry for self-employment permit applications. Regarding the waiting time, it can be short, it can be long. If you submit an incomplete application or one that shows no viability, then the rejection speed can be quite high. I consulted on a self-employment application that they got their answer within 2 months, and they got it approved. But they had a very robust business plan. They showed that they understood the industry, they had a good plan, and they had signed a fairly big letter of intent right when they applied as well. So they had everything in place that showed that they had a sustainable and good business plan. So it really depends kind of on you as well, and how complete of an application you actually submit. With regards to Bolagsverket, Skatteverket, Migrationsverket don't really, they're not talking to each other on a regular basis. But after you've submitted the self-employment permit application, as long as you apply before a previous permit expired and you are eligible, then you can start working on your self-employment permit. It is best then to work with, an accountant, or just make sure that your taxes and everything are above board, because if you have issues with those, typically when it comes to extension time, Migrationsverket will check all the information from Bolagsverket and Skatteverket, so there's no kind of hiding if you haven't paid taxes or anything like that. They do find out that information. When you submit your first application, you'll need to submit your kind of registreringsbevis. So you're kind of your certificate of your share certificate of your company. So at that stage, Migrationsverket will also know um, you if and when you registered your business as well. So just assume that everybody's going to be able to talk to each other, whether they actually do talk to each other on a regular basis. But in terms of priority topics or industry for self-employment, I don't think that there is a priority, but I would say that probably, IT consulting is probably the safest bet if that's what your background is in. Um, Anything kind of within like IT or engineering, I feel like does fairly well, or with anything within the education sphere. I'm assuming that starting your own restaurant, for example, will have fairly low priority, and they're going to be very critical of that one as well, just because the startup costs are so high. So if you're starting your own business, then trying to think something around what can you do by yourself as a consultant has much lower startup fees, which also makes it a lower risk idea. Great. If there are no more questions then, this was just a brief webinar about navigating the self-employment permit in Sweden. The QR code, then you can go to that to sign up for an account at emigrate.io. I will put the link if you'd like to have access to our self-employment starter kit. I will put that in the comments for under this webinar as well. And you are free to kind of go back and watch this both in LinkedIn and on YouTube. And I will try to answer all the questions in writing that you guys have had in the webinar. We'll put it into, we'll answer everybody's questions tomorrow as well. So thank you guys so much for joining. Hope everybody has a good evening. Thanks for joining us after working hours, and have a great evening. Bye.